Good morning, everybody. My name is John. I'm a recovered alcoholic. And what we're going to be touching base on today is what the disease actually consists of. Because I know a lot of you have been to treatment centers. You've had a lot of information that's been shared with you, and that gives you a good basic foundation. I can tell you everything you need to know about staying sober the rest of your life in just a matter of minutes. Whether you get it in a matter of minutes, or whether you take 5 years, or you take 50 years, or whether you die from this disease, it's going to have a lot to do with how closely you look at what's really going on. Now, many of you in here have seen some of this information from being in our classes before, and some of you it's brand new information. For those of you that I gave a piece of paper, you want to lay that out in front of you. Particularly, you'll notice there is a chart on it that matches the chart on the whiteboard. Now, this research is the latest research done on genetics in the human body, because we've done a couple of major studies worldwide. One is called the HapMap Project, and the other is the Human Genome Project. This gives us all new information about exactly what many diseases are, and alcoholism just happens to be one of those diseases we've identified in this process of breaking down the human genome. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with what genetic structure is what determines our hair color, our eye color, our height, our weight, determines things like whether we're going to be likely to be a diabetic or to have cancer or alcoholism. Now, for years and years, there was a debate about whether alcoholism was a disease. By the way, when I say alcoholism, include in that any other drug that you wish. Alcoholism is the standard term that I use to incorporate all of the drug use as well as alcohol use. Because as you can see in this study, there is what we call alcohol and other drug use. They overlap. That means there are a lot of genes that do overlap. So to begin with, we're going to talk a little bit about that. If I prefer alcohol as my primary drug, or let's say I prefer heroin as my primary drug, and my primary drug is taken away for a sufficient period of time, and I'm offered something else, I will do that other drug. I'm going to change the way I feel. So the concept that there's such a thing as a pure, thoroughbred alcoholic, or that there is a pure, quote, drug addict, is actually a misthinking of the situation. You take any heroin addict and you take away the heroin long enough, if they're a real addict, they're going to look for something else to change the way they feel. Same goes for the alcoholic. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look in the doctor's opinion here out of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I believe it is on XXX, or Roman numeral 30, out of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm going to read the second full paragraph there. It says, the classification of alcoholics seems most difficult and in much detail is outside the scope of this book. There are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We're all familiar with this type. They're always going on the wagon for keeps. They are over-remorseful and make many resolutions, but never a decision. Now, this book was written in 1939. It's when it rolled off the press. Dr. Silkworth, who was a psychiatrist, observed this type of alcoholic. Now, let's break down really quick what he just told us here. He just told us that the psychopath is the person who tries to stop, says, man, I'm never going to drink again, or I'm never going to use drugs again. Always going on the wagon for keeps. That's what that means. And then they start over again. So if you've had this characteristic where you've attempted to stop and you really meant business, and then you started again, which if you're like me, you did it over and over again over a period of years. What that means is you fit this category. Now, there are a lot of people in various Alcoholics Anonymous programs and NA programs that will say, well, I fit all of these categories on XXX. Well, really, all you have to do is fit in one of these categories to know you've got a really serious issue that requires real attention. And that's this one we're talking about right now. So if we boil it down to its essence here, if you have tried to quit and been unable to quit, then you are falling into the psychopathic category. Well, the information that I have before me that's based on the genetics of alcohol and other drug dependence, I'll read a little bit of information right off this first paragraph. It's kind of a summary. This is entitled, The Genetics of Alcohol and Other Drug Dependence. It says, alcohol dependence and dependence on other drugs frequently co-occur, and strong evidence suggests that both disorders are at least in part influenced by genetic factors. Indeed, studies using twins suggest that the overlap between dependence on alcohol and other drugs largely result from shared genetic factors. This common genetic liability, which also extends to antisocial behavior, has been conceptualized as a general predisposition towards a variety of forms of psychopathology, characterized by disinhibited behavior, i.e., externalizing psychopathology. Accordingly, many of the genetic factors affecting risk for dependence on alcohol or other drugs appear to act through a general externalizing factor. However, other genetic factors appear to be specific to a certain disorder. In recent years, researchers have identified numerous genes as affecting risk for dependence on alcohol and other drugs. These include genes involved in alcohol metabolism, as well as the transmission of nerve cell signals and modulation of nerve cell activity, i.e., aminobutyric acid and acetylcholinergic neurotransmission, and the endogenous opioid and cannabinoid systems. In plain English, what that just told us is this has a general predisposition towards a variety of forms of psychopathology. That means what we have here on the board, you'll notice the top circle says genes influencing external psychopathy. This set of genes, if you had this alone and you didn't have any of these other genes that are below that, would mean that you're going to have a couple of characteristics. One is you're going to have conduct disorder. It means you're going to do things that are not necessarily fitting within what society wants you to. You're going to get in trouble at school, things like that. You're not going to listen to your parents. You're going to have trouble with authority figures. Based on your genes. This isn't something you develop because somebody put you on the toilet backwards when you were a baby. You're born with a characteristic that makes you want to have conduct disorder. Now, this is usually associated with children and teenagers. Conduct disorder. It also extends to antisocial personality disorder. which is a term that's misunderstood by most people, so I'm going to take a moment to explain what antisocial personality disorder is. Antisocial personality disorder means I do not care about other people's feelings. It is a psychopathic condition. I'm incapable of genuinely putting your needs before my own. If I'm born with these genes, then what I think is normal is actually not what is normal. Because everything I do is based on how it affects me, what I can get out of it, how it's going to benefit me. 15% of the population have these genes. That's the most recent estimate. I've heard estimates as low as 10% and as high as 15%. So I use the 15% number there. Listen closely. If you are born with these genes, that means you think entirely different than the other 85% of the population. Guess who gets to make the rules for our society? The 85%. We've heard the majority rules. Well, the majority of people do not understand the way we think. This also extends, these genes influencing, externalizing psychopathy, extend to drug dependence and alcohol dependence. We talked about that a little bit a moment ago. Now, depending on which drug you like most, which is a relatively small part of this equation, is down here. It's another set of genes that come into play and say, well, you're set up to really like benzodiazepines, or you're set up to really like cocaine, or you're set up to really like alcohol. It has almost zero to do with the actual problem. So this idea, when one approaches us and says, well, I'm a drug addict, or I'm an alcoholic, or I'm a heroin addict, well, yeah, the drugs are different. We all know that. Marijuana is different than heroin, and heroin is different than alcohol. But the solution is always the same. And that's what we're going to be looking at here, is what the solution is. And throughout these various workshops that we have, we're going to really identify what the solution is. For this morning, we're going to look at this problem. Now, there are two things that will indicate if you have this problem. This is how you diagnose yourself as an alcoholic or drug addict. Well, do you think that would be important to be able to diagnose yourself?
Well, sure.
Oh, okay. I think it's important, because if you're not a drug addict or alcoholic, there's something else wrong with you. Or maybe there's not anything wrong with you. Maybe it's just how you roll.
Misunderstanding.
Number one is a craving. The craving, listen closely on this, is not something we talk about before you've used the drugs or alcohol. Craving is something that occurs after you've used the drugs or alcohol. If when you have taken in the drugs into your system, you have a very strong urge to do more drugs or alcohol, which with alcohol, that might be, after you finish your first drink, you really want a second drink. And with some drugs, it may be a few hours before you really want to do more drugs. But if you have a craving for more after you've put the chemical in your system, that's what we identify as a craving. For our purposes, we do not talk about cravings like craving for cake because I just want a cake, or I'm craving a Schlotsky sandwich. No, this is not that misuse of the word or the way that word can be used. I'm not necessarily going to say it's a misuse, but a lot of people say, man, I'm really craving a Whataburger. Well, that's not the kind of craving we're talking. We're talking about a real craving that occurs after we put the drug in our system. This craving, in its full-blown state, they say is equivalent of being held underwater for 70 seconds. And after you take a drink, that's how badly you're going to want another drink. Now, it occurs very frequently. Does it occur every single time? Not always, not in all people. that are alcoholic. But it does occur. So it's about craving. Can you control how much you take in every time? If you can control how much you take in every time, then you're probably not an alcoholic. But that means I get to control how much I take in every single time. I never miss a lick one time in my life. Okay, obsession is the next part. So we have part 1, which is craving. We have part 2, which is obsession. Now, obsession is when I've gotten off the drug or alcohol, I don't have any in my system, and maybe it's been a month or 2, or maybe it's been a year since I've had anything to drink, and I all of a sudden get this idea that it'd be a good idea to take a drink, and I start obsessing on it, and then I go get a drink or a drug. So obsession occurs days, months, or possibly years after I've had the last drink. These two things are involved, and if you've got them, if you have these things, those are the symptoms, craving and obsession. If you've got them, that means you've got these genes. You cannot wish these genes away. You can't pray these genes away. This is just like if you were born blue-eyed and you decided, I want to have brown eyes. Well, that's not going to happen, is it? No, you got the genes, you're stuck with them. Now, in this case, we've got to do something about all this antisocial personality disorder and conduct disorder and the drug dependence, alcohol dependence. We're going to talk a little bit about the antisocial personality disorder just a little bit more. The inability to care and have feelings the way we should. For example, if you are capable of renting a house and then leaving and not paying your rent, that's a psychopathic act. Now, don't get this confused with a person who's legitimately lost their job, out of work, and would pay the bill. But the person who can relatively comfortably look at, well, I need that money to get my life started, and I need to not pay that bill. That is an act of psychopathy. Or if I go get a cell phone, and I agree in my agreement that I'm going to pay the bill every month, and then I don't pay that bill, that's an act of psychopathy. I'm not keeping my agreement. Now, in the book here, it's telling us that not only are we having a hard time keeping our agreement with other people, but we can't keep an agreement with ourselves, can we? We're always going on the wagon for keeps. And then we start again, and we're over remorseful, etc. Now, this condition can extend to the point, you've heard of like psychopaths that kill people, right? Okay, well, it can extend to that point. Now, it's probably not going to do that in you. Most people with a psychopathic condition don't ever become killers in the sense that we're actually out there harming people like that. However, that's the extreme state of it, is when my pleasure means more than your life. It's the most extreme state. Well, we don't think about it, but when we don't come home to the wife because we've got more important things to do, and we let her sit there and worry and fret, we're not caring about her feelings. When we don't pay that bill, and we let someone feel that they've been wronged and they're hurt, they trusted us, it's the same thing. It's just not as an extreme an example. When we don't show up for work because my interests matter more than your job or the company you're running, then that's that same kind of behavior. I don't care how I'm hurting other people. Now, you'll notice here that if you take away all the drugs and alcohol, then you're still going to have the conduct disorder and antisocial personality disorder left over. So getting rid of the drugs and alcohol is a very small part of treating this disease. It's virtually doing nothing about it. Because the reason we're using this drugs and alcohol is to try to make life more bearable. And like the book says, we essentially use the drugs and alcohol because we like the effect that it produces. But if you take away the drugs and alcohol, you still have these components here on the right-hand side there. The conduct disorder, antisocial personality disorder. So, we're going to jump over to page 27 real quick. Actually, we're going to read a little bit about page 26 and 27. I'm going to tell you why we're reading this. We're going to dispel the belief that getting off of drugs is so we can have a lot of money and have the things we want. Because that's another thing that we are taught that is an absolute falsehood. We're not getting off drugs and alcohol so we can get a good job and have a lot of money. At the top of page 26, it reads, "A certain American businessman had ability, good sense, and high character. For years he had floundered from one sanitarium to another. He had consulted the best-known American psychiatrist. Then he had gone to Europe, placing himself in the care of the celebrated physician, the psychiatrist Dr. Jung, who prescribed for him. Though experience had made him skeptical, he finished his treatment with unusual confidence. His physical and mental condition were unusually good. Above all, he believed he had acquired such a profound knowledge of the inner workings of his mind and its hidden springs that relapse was unthinkable. Nevertheless, he was drunk in a short time. More baffling still, he could give himself no satisfactory explanation for his fall. So he returned to the doctor, whom he admired, and asked him point blank why he could not recover. He wished above all things to regain self-control. He seemed quite rational and well-balanced with respect to other problems. Yet he had no control whatever over alcohol. Why was this? He begged the doctor to tell him the whole truth, and he got it. In the doctor's judgment, he was utterly hopeless. He could never regain his position in society and would have to place himself under lock and key or hire a bodyguard if he expected to live long. That was the great physician's opinion. But this man still lives and is a free man. He does not need a bodyguard, nor is he confined. He can go anywhere on this earth where other free men may go, without disaster, provided he remains willing to maintain a certain simple attitude. Some of our alcoholic readers may think they can do without spiritual help. Let us tell you the rest of the conversation our friend had with his doctor. The doctor said, "You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I've never seen one single case recover where that state of mind existed to the extent that it does in you." Our friend felt as though the gates of hell had closed in on him with a clang. He said to the doctor, "Is there no exception?" "Yes," replied the doctor, "there is. Exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are a phenomenon. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes which once were the guiding forces of the lives of these men are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begins to dominate them. In fact, I've been trying to produce some such emotional rearrangement within you. With many individuals, the methods I've employed are successful. But I've never been successful with an alcoholic of your description." Upon hearing this, our friend was somewhat relieved, for after all, he reflected that after all, he was a good church member. This hope, however, was destroyed by the doctor telling him that while his religious convictions were very good, In his case, they did not spell the necessary, vital, spiritual experience. Well, first and foremost, this American businessman is a man by the name of Rowland Hazard. A very wealthy individual. His family is the family behind Allied Chemical. They're the family that has ultimately grown into the Honeywell Corporation. Today, they're a multi-billion-dollar corporation. 1930, actually this is happening in the mid-1920s. They were very, very wealthy then. He went to the best American psychiatrist, all of them that he could think of. I mean, not every psychiatrist, but all the best. I want you to let that soak in for a second. We're going to dispel one big belief right now that if he wants it, he'll stay sober. This has very little to do with you wanting it. This has very little to do with that. That is a false teaching. That it's a matter of how badly you want it. This man had been all over the United States going to the best psychiatrist, so obviously he wants it. He's very wealthy. We're going to dispel another belief that this is about getting your money back and getting your toys back. This man is never going to be without toys or the finest things that money can buy. Let that soak in. When we talk about unmanageable lives, it's had nothing to do with money. It's had nothing to do with looking cool. This has to do with the disease. That's the only reason we're here, is to treat a disease. So after he's went to all these psychiatrists, he obviously wants it bad, probably as bad as anybody in this room, and maybe a lot worse than anybody in this room. And he can't get sober. He goes to Dr. Carl Gustav Jung, who was known at the time as probably the premier or best psychiatrist in the world. To this day, Dr. Jung is well respected among the psychiatric and psychological communities. He developed things such as the personality test that we take today. Had a lot to do with all of those things. So this man would be on par with psychiatry what Einstein was with physics. So naturally, if you're one of the wealthiest people around, you're going to go to one of the best doctors in the world. So he goes to Switzerland from the United States. He gets on a boat. I guess it probably takes a couple of weeks. I don't know how long it took. He wants to get sober. He's headed to Switzerland. He arrives in Switzerland and he stays at the doctor's facility for 1 year. Wow. At which time he has no alcohol for 1 year while he's under the doctor's care. So having a year or 60 days or 90 days, again, is a very small part of this. In fact, I don't know how big a role it plays in it, and we're going to read about that in just a minute. I don't know if dry time has much to do with we're getting better. I know we celebrate it. We got our little chips and everything. I don't, and I think you'll agree with me after we read the next portion that we're about to in this book. Dry time has very little to do with this. Okay, so Rowland Hazard has a year. Bless you. Rowland Hazard has a year, and here's what happens is within a short time, he's drunk again after he leaves the doctor's care. Now, some people say that it's as much as a couple of months. Other people say he gets drunk on his way on the train on his way to France before he even gets out of Europe. All we know that it's a short time. It probably is a relatively short time. Okay. He goes back to the doctor. He begs the doctor to tell him what's going on. And the doctor tells him, right here, that in his opinion, he was utterly hopeless. That alcoholics like him are hopeless. What kind of alcoholics are we talking about? Chronic alcoholic, yeah. How do we identify chronic alcoholic?
That's
right. If you got these two conditions, then you're a chronic alcoholic or chronic drug addict. If you've got a craving or an obsession, then you're chronic. That means at this point in time in history, this is before the big book was written, this is before we had any effective treatment, they considered this kind of person hopeless. And you see what his prescription was at this point. You need to go put yourself in under lock and key. You need to go get locked up in an asylum and stay there the rest of your life. Otherwise, you're going to die. And this is a super wealthy man asking for advice. And he's being told, listen, dude, you're going to die soon because you're an alcoholic. It's going to get bad. So you can go lock yourself up, or maybe you can go hire a bodyguard that every time you reach for a drink, he'll beat you up. He will restrain you and keep you from taking a drink. That might work. I mean, but we're talking about serious confinement here. You've got to be restrained from doing what real alcoholics do. So, we're going to jump over a couple of pages back on page 20. At the bottom of page 20, it's really right before that last sentence starts. It says, moderate drinkers have little trouble giving up liquor entirely if they have a good reason for it. They can take it or leave it alone. So let's talk about that person. This is what your 85% people are. They're moderate drinkers. That means they can drink a little bit, they don't get a craving, and they never have an obsession. So they can have a few drinks, and then they can leave it alone. If they want to go 6 months without alcohol, they go 6 months. If they want to go 6 years without alcohol or drugs, 6 years. If they decide they don't want to ever drink again, they never drink again. They never have the problems that we do of saying drugs are really the option that I choose against my will. That never occurs in 85% of the population. Moderate drinkers have little trouble giving up liquor entirely if they have a good reason for it. Then it goes on to say, then we have a certain type of hard drinker. This is not the moderate drinker, the hard drinker. Now this, you can also say hard drug user, the person who uses a lot of excessive drugs. He may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. So this hard drinker is looking a little different than your moderate drinker. His brain is being affected. It's impairing him mentally and physically. So he's suffering physical illness from drinking or using drugs. And it goes on to say it may cause him to die a few years before his time. If a sufficiently strong reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can also stop or moderate. I mean, you got to hear me here. If you miss this, you're missing a lot. This hard drinker, if you were looking at him, you'd look at him, he's shaving years off of his life. He's sick. He's in the hospital from drinking too much. His mind's not working right. He's a hard drinker. But if the warning of the doctor says, hey man, you're drinking too much, it's unhealthy, he can stop or moderate based on that one statement. Oh, really, doc? Okay, well, I'm just going to stop then. You know what stop means?
Never again doing it.
I didn't know what stop meant. Because I'm this guy. I'm this person with this psychopathy. I've got a genetic difference that tells me I don't know how to stop. Then it goes on to say, although he may find it difficult and troublesome and may even need medical attention. So when he's decided, after the doctor says, dude, you're killing yourself, the old liver's taking a beating, he may actually need to be hospitalized. Now, if the world at general were looking at this man, they would diagnose him as an alcoholic. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But guess what? He's not. The person we just described is not an alcoholic. Let's look at the real alcoholic. It tells us in the next paragraph. But what about the real alcoholic? He may start off as a moderate drinker. So he starts off looking like other people. He can go to a party and kind of look like a regular guy. He's a moderate drinker. Goes to the bar and just has a few drinks. He may start off as a moderate drinker. That may last like 2 or 3 years. Okay. So the symptoms have not come full force yet. He looked like the normal guy. That's a tricky part, isn't it? Now next it says, he may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. Wow. The real alcoholic may not become a continuous hard drinker. Let that soak in for a second. He may only drink 2 or 3 times a year. But he's a real alcoholic. See, he's drinking less than the hard drinker. Hard drinker's not an alcoholic, doesn't have these genes. Hard drinker's part of this 85% is just drinking a lot of alcohol. The real alcoholic has these genes, so something's different about him. And it tells us a little bit about that. It says, but at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control over his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. These things start kicking in. He's losing control. Because this is all about control and choice. He's losing control of his liquor consumption or his drug use once he starts. He goes out to just do a little bump, some meth, because it's been a few months since he's had any. And next thing you know, he hadn't been to sleep in 10 days. Other than brief moments here and there. Or he goes out to the bar, he's going to have 1 beer on his way home. And he doesn't make it home until 2 o'clock in the morning. But his dinner's sitting in the oven cold. The wife's laying in bed. Or maybe he goes out for a gallon of milk. Decides he's going to drop by and just have 1 drink. He's picking up some milk for the babies. And then he ends up in Wyoming with a strange woman. That's an actual something Mark Houston did. Or maybe he's on his way to his mom's funeral. He's just going to have 1 drink at the airport. And he doesn't make it to the funeral. That's the difference. And it is different. It is completely different than being a hard drinker. Make no mistake about it. A hard drinker is a normal person that's gotten carried away with alcohol. So, what we're looking at here is first, Roland Hazard, super wealthy man, right? It was not a matter of getting money back and getting his things back. That's not why we sober up. So no matter how many people have told you that up to this moment, you throw that nonsense out the window. That's like going to somebody with cancer and telling me, as soon as you get off cancer, you're going to get yourself a good job. You'll be able to take care of your family. It's the least of the cancer patient's worries, I promise you. It's like, if I can get over this cancer, I'll freaking live.
Yeah.
Okay? Well, that's what we have. We have something as fatal as cancer. By the way, this is more fatal than cancer. 1 out of 35 people that have alcoholism or drug addiction actually live and don't die from this disease. 1 out of 35. The cancer patient recovery rate is much higher than the drug addict rate. So again, make no mistake about it. It is a fatal disease that is ready to kill you. And the real sad thing is, it's not even a decent disease in the sense that anybody gives you any pity. No, because you're ruining every relationship or anything worthwhile for that last few years.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to jump over here to another page. Page 39. And Josh, would you care to read 39 to the bottom of 42?
Sure. That may be true of certain non-alcoholic people who, though drinking foolishly and heavily at the present time, are able to stop or moderate because their brains and bodies have not been damaged as ours were. But the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly any exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. This is a point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize, to smash home upon our alcoholic readers as it has been revealed to us out of bitter experience. Let's take another illustration. Fred is a partner in a well-known accounting firm. His income is good, he has a fine home, is happily married, and the father of promising children of college age. He has so attractive a personality that he makes friends with everyone. If ever there was a successful businessman, it is Fred. To all appearance, he is a stable, well-balanced individual, yet he is an alcoholic. We first saw Fred about a year ago in a hospital where he had gone to recover from a bad case of jitters. It was his first experience of this kind, and he was much ashamed of it. Far from admitting he was an alcoholic, he told himself he came to the hospital to rest his nerves. The doctor intimated strongly that he might be worse than he realized. For a few days he was depressed about his condition. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. It never occurred to him that perhaps he could not do so, in spite of his character and standing. Fred would not believe himself an alcoholic, much less accept a spiritual remedy for his problems. We told him what we knew about alcoholism. He was interested and conceded that he had some of the symptoms, but he was a long way from admitting that he could do nothing about it himself. He was positive that this humiliating experience, plus the knowledge he had acquired, would keep him sober the rest of his life. Self-knowledge would fix it. We heard no more of Fred for a while. One day we were told that he was back in the hospital. This time he was quite shaky. He soon indicated he was anxious to see us. The story he told is most instructive, for here was a chap absolutely convinced he had to stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all his other concerns, yet was flat on his back nevertheless. Let him tell you about it. I was much impressed with what you fellows said about alcoholism, and I frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again. I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink, but I was confident it could not happen to me after what I had learned. I reasoned I was not so far advanced as most of you fellows, that I had been usually successful in licking my other personal problems, and that I would therefore be successful where you men failed. I felt I had every right to be self-confident, that it would only be a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. In this frame of mind, I went about my business, and for a time all was well. I had no trouble refusing drinks, and began to wonder if I had not been making too hard work of a simple matter. One day I went to Washington to present some accounting evidence to a government bureau. I had been out of town before during this particular dry spell, so there was nothing new about that. Physically, I felt fine. Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries. My business came off well. I was pleased and knew my partners would be too. It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to my mind that it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. That was all, nothing more. I ordered a cocktail in my meal, then I ordered another cocktail. After dinner, I decided to take a walk. When I returned to the hotel, it struck me a highball would be fine before going to bed, so I stepped into the bar and had one. I remember having several more that night and plenty next morning. I have a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York and of finding a friendly taxicab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for several days. I know little of where I went or what I said and did. Then came the hospital with the unbearable mental and physical suffering. As soon as I regained my ability to think, I went carefully over that evening in Washington. Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. This time I had not thought of the consequences at all. I had commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. I now remembered what my alcoholic friends had told me, how they prophesied that if I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come, I would drink again. They had said that though I did raise a defense, it would one day give way before some trivial reason for having a drink. Well, just that did happen and more, for what I learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all. I knew from that moment that I had an alcoholic mind. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help in these strange mental blank spots. I have never been able to understand people who said that a problem had them hopelessly defeated. I knew then it was a crushing blow. 2 of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. They grinned, which I didn't like so much, and then asked me if I thought myself alcoholic and if I were really licked this time. I had to concede both propositions. They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality such as I had exhibited in Washington was a hopeless condition. They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozen. This process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction that I could do the job myself. Then they outlined the spiritual answer and program of action which 100 of them had followed successfully. Though I had been only a nominal churchman, their proposals were not intellectually hard to swallow. But the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out the window. That was not easy. But the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be.
Thank you very much, Josh. Let's break this down a little bit. Fred is an accountant, a well-known accounting firm in the Northeast. He's not a dummy, right? Not only is he a well-known accountant, he's flying to Washington to present the government accounting evidence. That means he's something like a forensic accountant. That means he can look at the books of another accountant and break it down. Something along those lines. I don't know the exact details, but just to clue you in, this is a smart man. Okay, he's got kids college age. Hey man, the girls or guys are going to college. Got a beautiful wife. This guy's not under the bridge. This guy's not out gangbanging. This guy's not out there raising hell. No, this is a gentleman that is smart. He's got a great job. He's got a great family. Well, what does he describe here? A mental blank spot. Now, you need to let that one soak in because that's what's going to get your butt. It's not going to be think through the drink because that doesn't exist when you're ready, when your mind, this other personality, clicks on in the snap of a finger or the blink of an eye and says, we're taking over your life. It's going to be what they call a mental blank spot. Now, he had self-knowledge. He obviously had willpower. He got through college. He was working for the government, or at least delivering information to the government, and had done a good job as a dad. He had lots of willpower, right? Well, what does it say here on page 42? I'd never been able to understand how people who said that a problem had them hopelessly defeated. Just above that, it says, I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help in those strange mental blank spots. Why? Well, guys, we come back to this. We've got a severe difference in our genetic makeup. We can't wish it away. We can't willpower it away. We're going to die. And the likelihood of our death happening in the near future is very likely, more so than if you were diagnosed with cancer. We're not getting sober so we can buy a bunch of toys and impress our family. See, because we just read about it. You can be all impressive you want to your family. That's not what sobriety is about. Why do they, at these treatment centers and so forth, hammer us so hard that it's all about having some money and having a life now? You see, they haven't stopped to read this book, have they? To really pay attention to what it's trying to tell us. The bottom of 43, and I'm going to end with this reading, it says, once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink, except in a few rare cases. Neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. Well, that's what we're going to show you throughout the rest of the week, how to get that defense. We've ran out of time this morning. This morning's meeting is about the first step. That's what we talked about today. The first step. You got the genes. You're powerless. You've got the obsession. You're unmanageable. We've got the point across today that it has nothing to do with the management thing, has nothing to do with your money. It has nothing to do with any of that. That is absolutely just throw that nonsense out the window. You can wait until later to get money. You gotta do this now to save your life. So this is the first step. I'd like you to remember this so you can teach the next guy at some point. Because the knowledge you're getting here is not readily available. Now, the first thing about this psychopathology, if you want to start treating it today, is to realize you're not here just getting this information for you. You're getting this information so you can save that next person out there that is suffering from this fatal disease. So that you can sit down with that forensic accountant or that preacher or that doctor or that lawyer and say, here's a kit of spiritual tools that will save your life. That's what you're gearing up for. That's what you're training for. And that's also what's going to save your life. Because once we quit being selfish, we start dedicating our time to helping others for free. Can't charge money for it or it won't work. Because that's the same as a bribe, right? We got to get out there for free. And we've got to help others. That starts working on that very sick mind of ours. And goes very deep. So that we can get better. We can get over this severe antisocial personality disorder. With that being said, let's wrap this up with a Lord's Prayer. Good morning, everybody. My name is John. I'm a recovered alcoholic. And what we're going to be touching base on today is what the disease actually consists of. Because I know a lot of you have been to treatment centers. You've had a lot of information that's been shared with you, and that gives you a good basic foundation. I can tell you everything you need to know about staying sober the rest of your life in just a matter of minutes. Whether you get it in a matter of minutes, or whether you take 5 years, or you take 50 years, or whether you die from this disease, it's going to have a lot to do with how closely you look at what's really going on. Now, many of you in here have seen some of this information from being in our classes before, and some of you it's brand new information. For those of you that I gave a piece of paper, you want to lay that out in front of you. Particularly, you'll notice there is a chart on it that matches the chart on the whiteboard. Now, this research is the latest research done on genetics in the human body, because we've done a couple of major studies worldwide. One is called the HapMap Project, and the other is the Human Genome Project. This gives us all new information about exactly what many diseases are, and alcoholism just happens to be one of those diseases we've identified in this process of breaking down the human genome. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with what genetic structure is what determines our hair color, our eye color, our height, our weight, determines things like whether we're going to be likely to be a diabetic or to have cancer or alcoholism. Now, for years and years, there was a debate about whether alcoholism was a disease. By the way, when I say alcoholism, include in that any other drug that you wish. Alcoholism is the standard term that I use to incorporate all of the drug use as well as alcohol use. Because as you can see in this study, there is what we call alcohol and other drug use. They overlap. That means there are a lot of genes that do overlap. So to begin with, we're going to talk a little bit about that. If I prefer alcohol as my primary drug, or let's say I prefer heroin as my primary drug, and my primary drug is taken away for a sufficient period of time, and I'm offered something else, I will do that other drug. I'm going to change the way I feel. So the concept that there's such a thing as a pure, thoroughbred alcoholic, or that there is a pure, quote, drug addict, is actually a misthinking of the situation. You take any heroin addict and you take away the heroin long enough, they're a real addict, they're going to look for something else to change the way they feel. Same goes for the alcoholic. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look in the doctor's opinion here out of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I believe it is on XXX, or Roman numeral 30 of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm going to read the second full paragraph there. It says, the classification of alcoholics seems most difficult and in much detail is outside the scope of this book. There are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We're all familiar with this type. They're always going on the wagon for keeps. They are over-remorseful and make many resolutions, but never a decision. Now, this book was written in 1939. It's when it rolled off the press. Dr. Silkworth, who was a psychiatrist, observed this type of alcoholic. Now, let's break down really quick what he just told us here. He just told us that the psychopath is the person who tries to stop, says, man, I'm never going to drink again, or I'm never going to use drugs again. Always going on the wagon for keeps. That's what that means. And then they start over again. So if you've had this characteristic where you've attempted to stop and you really meant business, And then you started again. Which, if you're like me, you did it over and over again.